So is the FBI using GPS trackers to spy on American citizens? A California man says that he stumbled upon one of the devices on his car when he just went in for a routine oil change. Days later, the FBI came knocking on his door, demanding it back. A tracker looks like a small box with a remote control, and it's used to gather information and pinpoint locations that can typically be viewed in real time with a map. Pete Williams is NBC News Justice correspondent, and he is joining us now live from Washington to talk about this. Pete, is this legal? Do they have every right to do this?
Depends on which federal court you ask. Most federal courts that have looked at this question say this is actually a completely constitutional action, that it is okay to do without a search warrant. And that's the issue here. The government can wiretap your phone, but it has to have a court order to do that. It can do a lot of things to search your house, but it has to have a search warrant. So the question here is, does the government need a warrant to do this? And 3 federal appeals courts, including one in California where this device was found, say, no, the government doesn't need that. Now, here's the theory that the courts have used. When you're driving your car, you're doing it on a public street, and you have no expectation of privacy in your movements when you drive your car on a public street. And so that if the federal agents were behind you, following you, if they were using poles, cameras that are mounted around town to follow your movements, or satellites, or some other means, they wouldn't need a search warrant for that. And so the federal courts have said putting a gizmo on your car so they don't have to actually follow you, they can do it remotely, is not a violation of your rights, because you have no expectation of privacy in where you go on a public street. Now, one federal court has ruled otherwise. The D.C. Federal Court of Appeals here, in a case involving the placement of a GPS device for several weeks, said, you know what, when you have a long-term use of this device, then it becomes something else. Sure, you have no expectation of privacy because everybody can see you driving down the street, and people on the street can watch you drive by, but no one's in a position to be able to know where you're going for weeks at a time. So that federal court has said when you use these things for a long period of time, that becomes a unconstitutional search without a warrant. Now, I think ultimately this question is going to have to be resolved by the Supreme Court. There have been similar questions in the past about tracking beepers that are placed in people's cars. And another interesting thing about one of the cases in California is that the FBI, the police, actually went onto the person's private property to place the device. The car was in a driveway, and the court said even that is not unconstitutional. So the courts are split on this, although most of them have said you don't need a search warrant to do this.
All right, Pete Williams in Washington for us. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We want to get reaction now from the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Attorney Zara Ballou joins us now. And Zara, explain to us, did the FBI confirm that they put the device under this car? And the man that we're talking about here is Yasser Afifi. He's a 20-year-old computer salesman and student. He is a U.S.-born citizen. His father died last year. He was a U.S. citizen and also former president of the Muslim Community Association. So did they explain why the FBI was investigating Mr. Afifi once he found this?
Right, and that's the problem with this story, is that we still don't know what the FBI wanted from Mr. Afifi. He found the tracking device. He confirmed it was something that is used only by law enforcement, and then 48 hours after finding it, the FBI showed up at his home and said, give it back to us. They essentially said, this is a very expensive piece of federal property. We need you to give it back to us, and if you don't cooperate, we'll arrest you.
All right,
what they indicated to him in their...
No, go ahead, Zara.
What they indicated to him in their conversation was, one, that they had been following him for some time, that they knew numerous intimate details of his life, and essentially they closed the conversation by saying he was boring. They did this, however, after asking him if he'd ever been to Yemen, if he'd ever been to any training camps, if he knew anyone who wanted to harm the United States. And all of these questions are problematic because they really simply amount to racial profiling. Mr. Afifi all along said, I'll cooperate with you, I'm willing to talk to you, I'd like to have my attorney present. And instead, they placed a GPS tracking device on his car. They did, like I said, they owned up to it. They took the device back, and they did admit to us that they had an interest in him.
All right, so there's talk that this particular incident could be used in a challenge on the court's decision. So is Mr. Afifi going to try to pursue some type of lawsuit in this?
It's too early to tell exactly what the legal strategy here will be. I will tell you, though, that Mr. Afifi, while being an extraordinary case because of his courage in challenging these civil rights violations, is not alone. There are numerous other cases across the country, including another one in the Bay Area, 2 in Ohio, where people have been, they found GPS tracking devices on their cars, and the FBI came and said, please give them back to us. And I find that to be very problematic as well, is they're not going to these individuals and saying, will you cooperate, will you answer these questions, will you talk to us?
Attorney Zara Ballou, I want to thank you for joining us to talk about this. I do appreciate your time.